Picture this. It's the World Series. Bottom of the inning, crowd is loud, millions of Americans watching. And instead of a beer ad or a truck commercial, they see this. Ronald Reagan in grainy 1980s footage, calmly warning that tariffs and trade wars hurt American workers and damage the economy. Over that black and white clip, bold text appears. Trade wars hurt everyone. No orange face, no shouted name, but everyone watching knows exactly who that ad is aimed at. Donald J. Trump. The ad is paid for not by Washington still, but by Ontario, a Canadian province whose factories depend on cross-border trade. Within days, Trump is online raging that the ad is fraudulent, accusing Canada of trying to influence the U.S. Supreme Court, and promising to both terminate trade talks and raise tariffs. And suddenly one question blows up in Washington. Did a Canadian Reagan ad just mess with one of the most important Supreme Court cases of Trump's second term? Tonight on Huge Press Room, we're going to break down the Supreme Court fight over Trump's emergency tariffs, why this Reagan ad landed at the worst possible time, and whether foreign anti-tariff campaigns like this one could actually backfire. By helping Trump in court, you're watching Huge Press Room. If you want more deep dives on Trump, Canada, and the real power games behind the headlines, hit subscribe, drop a like, and let's get into it. To understand why this ad matters, we have to start with the case in front of the Supreme Court. In Trump's second term, he didn't just renegotiate trade deals the old-fashioned way. He reached for something much more extreme, a law called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEPA. IEPA was written in the late 1970s to let presidents act fast in national emergencies. Freezing foreign assets, blocking transactions, sanctioning hostile regimes. It was designed for things like terrorism, wars, coups, not for annoying your neighbor. Trump used it for something else. He declared that fentanyl and illegal immigration from Canada and Mexico were an unusual and extraordinary threat to U.S. national security, and then used that emergency to justify an extra 25% tariff on most imports from Canada and Mexico, additional surcharges in some sectors, a 10% tariff on some energy and industrial products. Traditional trade lawyers freaked out, because if that move stands, it means any future president can declare almost anything a national emergency, ignore normal trade rules in Congress, and impose massive tariffs on allies whenever it's politically convenient. So a group of U.S. businesses, importers, and trade associations sued. Their argument was simple. IEPA was never meant to be a permanent backdoor for tariffs. The president is overreaching. Congress writes the tax laws, not the White House. That case climbed the ladder, district court, appeals court, and eventually, the Supreme Court agreed to hear it. At stake, billions in tariffs. The balance of power between Congress and the presidency, and the future of how America uses emergencies in economic policy. That's the background. Now drop a Canadian Reagan ad right on top of it. Let's talk about the ad itself. The Ontario government, led by Premier Doug Ford, was watching its auto plants and parts factories bleed from Trump's tariffs. Supply chains that had run smoothly for decades were suddenly paying 25% at the border. Investments were being delayed or canceled. Workers in Windsor, Oshawa, and across the province knew exactly whom they blamed. Ford's answer? Go over Trump's head, talk directly to Americans, and do it in a way that would hurt politically. His ad team dug into the archives and pulled out a 1987 radio address from Ronald Reagan, in which Reagan warned that tariffs often backfire. Trade wars hurt ordinary workers. Long-term prosperity comes from open, fair trade, not protectionism. They edited the audio, paired it with dramatic visuals, factories, workers, border shots, and splashed it across US TV during primetime sports. On screen, the message was crystal clear. If you love Reagan, you should hate Trump's tariffs. It didn't personally name Trump. It didn't say vote for X, vote against Y. But everyone knew what was going on. It was a foreign government using a dead Republican icon to attack a sitting Republican president's tariff policy. At the exact moment that policy was under review by the Supreme Court. That timing was not an accident. Now, from Ontario's perspective, this was a smart play. They thought Americans might not care about Canadian factories, but they do care what Reagan said. And conservative justices on the Supreme Court grew up in a world where Reagan is almost a saint. So if you blast Reagan's anti-tariff message into the American conversation right before oral arguments, maybe you shift public opinion against tariffs. Put subtle pressure on conservative justices who admire Reagan. Make it harder for Trump to claim he's just following the GOP's traditional playbook, but this is where things get messy. Because the ad didn't just attract attention in the US, it attracted outrage. Ronald Reagan's Presidential Foundation and Institute issued a public statement saying the ad used Reagan's words out of context, gave the impression he was speaking directly about Trump decades before Trump was even in politics and was never authorized or approved by the Reagan family or the foundation. In other words, they accused Ontario of hijacking Reagan's legacy for a foreign political message. That was all Trump needed. Trump unloaded. On Truth Social and in speeches, he blasted the ad as fraudulent foreign interference. A disgusting attempt to manipulate the American public, and then he did two things. First, he declared that all trade negotiations with Canada are hereby terminated. Any quiet back channel talks about softening tariffs. Dead. Any hope of a side deal for autos or energy? Gone for now. Second, he claimed the ad was specifically designed to influence the Supreme Court. He argued that Ontario timed the ad to run just days before oral arguments. The entire message was crafted to reach conservative justices through their love of Reagan. And therefore, Canada was meddling not just in US politics, but in America's judicial process. For Trump, it was perfect. Instead of just defending his use of emergency powers, he now got to say, look, they're so scared I'll win at the Supreme Court that they're trying to brainwash the American people with fake Reagan clips. In political terms, the Canadian ad gave him a story. The question is, did it give him a legal advantage too? Let's go inside the Supreme Court for a moment. Justices don't live in a vacuum. They read newspapers, they see clips. Their clerks show them what's buzzing. So when this case comes up, can the president use IEEPA to impose broad tariffs on Canada and Mexico? The justices are walking into oral argument with that Reagan ad drama fresh in the background. On one side, you have the plaintiffs, US businesses and importers, arguing Congress never authorized using IEEPA as a permanent tariff machine. The president is effectively taxing Americans without congressional approval. There have to be limits on what counts as an emergency. On the other side, Trump's lawyers say, the president needs flexibility to respond to drug crises and border threats. Courts shouldn't second-guess national security judgments, and foreign countries are actively campaigning against US policy. Just look at Ontario's ad. That last part is subtle but powerful. Your Honors, even as we sit here, foreign governments are spending millions to influence American opinion, and yes, possibly this court. Do you really want to tie the president's hands in the middle of that? For some conservative justices who are already inclined to defer to presidential power on security matters, that argument lands. They don't want to be seen as the ones who invite foreign lobbying into US policy and then strip the president of tools to respond. So ironically, an ad designed to weaken Trump's position may actually strengthen his narrative that America is under attack, economically and politically, and only a strong executive can defend it. There's another layer here. Reagan. Many of the justices grew up politically in the Reagan era. Some clerked for judges appointed by Reagan. Some joined the conservative legal movement when Reagan was the gold standard. Hearing Reagan's words in that ad may have two opposite psychological effects. Anti-tariff nudge. Wait, Reagan really did warn about tariffs and trade wars. Maybe this emergency approach goes against conservative economic principles. Resentment nudge. I respect Reagan, and I don't like seeing a foreign government chop up his speech and weaponize it against a sitting president. I'm not going to reward that kind of interference. We can't know exactly which way each justice leans, but we can say this. The more the ad is talked about as a foreign attempt to sway the court, the more some justices may feel a reflexive urge to prove they're not influenced by it. And how do you prove you're not influenced by an ad that attacks tariffs? By upholding more of the president's tariff power than people expected. That's the trap. So where does that leave Canada? On one hand, the Ontario ad did help accomplish some short-term goals. It got massive attention in US media. It reminded millions of Americans, and especially older Republicans, that Reagan spoke out against tariffs and trade wars. It put Trump on the defensive, forcing him to waste political oxygen attacking a dead president's foundation. On the other hand, it shattered whatever fragile trust still existed in Trump-Carney trade talks, gave Trump cover to freeze all negotiations with Canada, handed his lawyers a real-world example to point to when they warn the court about foreign interference. And in the long game, the game that really matters, it may have increased the risk that the Supreme Court gives presidents broad latitude to declare economic emergencies. Future presidents, not just Trump, can weaponize tariffs against allies with minimal oversight. Canada and other countries have to live with an even more unpredictable US trade policy for decades, all sparked in part by a 30-second ad. So was the Reagan ad a masterstroke or a misfire? If you're a worker in Ontario who loved seeing Reagan take Trump down, it probably felt like justice. If you're a constitutional lawyer watching the Supreme Court, you might be more nervous. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. You can't out-advertise a Supreme Court opinion. Commercials can shift moods. They can speed up or slow down political momentum. But the 9 people in those black robes will write something far more important. A decision that says how far a US president can go when they use emergency powers to reshape trade. If they side with Trump, even partially, and say, yes, IEEPA can be used this way, or we won't second-guess the president on what counts as an emergency, then Trump won't be the last leader to use that door. Future presidents of both parties will see tariffs on allies as a normal lever, not an extreme one. And every country that watched Ontario's ad will remember, when we tried to speak to the American people directly, it didn't change the ruling. It just made them angrier. So I'll leave you with this. Do you think foreign governments like Ontario should be running hard-hitting political ads inside the US to fight policies like tariffs, even if it risks being seen as meddling in Supreme Court cases and domestic politics? Is that smart, modern public diplomacy? Or a dangerous escalation that could justify even more aggressive moves from presidents like Trump? And if you were sitting on the Supreme Court, would that kind of ad make you more sympathetic to the anti-tariff arguments? Or less? Let me know what you think in the comments. If you want to understand how this Reagan ad fits into the bigger story, check out the rest of our series here on Huge Press Room. Our video on the Reagan ad that made Trump terminate all trade talks. The full political fallout. Takeo Trump. How Trump always chickens out but still wrecks the border economy. Carney's pipeline revolt and 25% tariffs. Is Trump forcing Canada to choose Asia over America? Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of Trump versus Canada. Thanks for watching Huge Press Room. I'll see you in the next one.